This is WPTV.
Last night was WWE Evolution, the first women's pay-per-view in professional wrestling history. Now we are here to break down how successful it was and what happened last night. With me today are Erica Schiller, Michele Sizz, and Joe Greco. Thank you guys for joining with me and talking about this, historic event that we just witnessed yesterday. So, some context for the pay-per-view. It was a response to the female performers not being happy that they weren't invited to the Greatest Royal Rumble in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. People were very, very upset they didn't get to see their favorite female performers have the stage. Then directly 2 weeks later, Stephanie McMahon comes out and says now she's making an all-women's pay-per-view in October. So my question first for Erica, was this a legitimate pay-per-view or was it a PR stunt dressed as a pay-per-view?
Oh, wow. Okay, hitting it hard and heavy. I really do think it was a legitimate pay-per-view. I mean, we've seen, I think since 2015, this evolution started originally when you had Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Charlotte Flair all introduced by Stephanie McMahon. I think that's when the newer age of the evolution started. And it was only just a matter of time before this pay-per-view became a real-life event.
Okay, Joe, I want to ask you, we saw some storylines going into this. We had some major storylines. We also had a bunch of matches that looked like they were just thrown together Frankenstein style, you know, just stitched together whoever was left over. Does that make it less legitimate to you?
Well, the match you're referring to is clearly Bayley, Sasha Banks, Natalya versus the Riot Squad.
I mean, I'm referring to a lot of them.
Anyway, that match was, I don't want to say thrown together haphazardly, but I also do want to say that because they're all super talented wrestlers. I think they did the best of what they had in that moment. But yeah, you're right. It could have been pushed together more, but listen, to see those 6 women wrestler was really good. I thought the Riot Squad worked great together. I thought those 2 worked great together, and plus they all did homages to past wrestlers for the finish, which I thought was really good. So I didn't mind it. So, but you know, whatever. I love Sasha and Bayley.
So you have a bias.
A little bit.
So Michele, I want to ask you, going forward, after watching last night's pay-per-view, do you think this truly changes anything for women's wrestling? Because we see it on the indie scene. Women are becoming announcers more often. WWE likes to think they're the first ones to do anything, but they're truly, they do a little bit of revisionist history. So is this really changing much in the grand scheme of professional wrestling for women?
No. Like, I am all for, here comes PR Michele, as always. I think it's a huge PR stunt. Like, I think that they probably, knowing WWE's history and Vince McMahon's attitude towards women and female wrestlers, I think honestly he just did it just to quiet the masses, because in the last 3 years, like you were saying, people wanted female wrestlers. They wanted more matches. So I think it's just to appease people, honestly. I don't think anything's really going to come out of it. I think it's going to be the same old stuff.
Okay.
Probably the last women's pay-per-view, honestly, for a very long time.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question for you, Erica. Do you think this is something that we're going to see like NXT had their takeovers, where first we had a takeover, and then people liked it so much that we started having more of them, and now we have at least, I think we have 8 a year. Now we're moving towards, do you think that we're going to have a women's pay-per-view now, then we're going to move towards having 2 a year, and then it's going to become a more regular thing down the pipe, or is this just going to be this is a yearly thing, kind of like WrestleMania? Once a year we highlight women.
I think it's going to be at least a yearly thing with the amount of, like Michele said, publicity that this did get. But I think it's going to at least stay at least a yearly thing just because of how it made the WWE Universe feel. I mean, I've been watching it since I was 10 years old. And when I first started watching it, there was a lot of matches like lingerie matches and bathing suit matches.
The infamous bra and panty matches.
Exactly. And to watch it now, seeing my favorite wrestlers from back in the day like Trish Stratus, Lita, everybody, and to new ones like Ronda Rousey and just to see them do amazing things, having tables, ladders, chairs, kendo sticks, doing all of it just like the guys, even better than the guys. I think that this is going to take full storm just because it's affected the WWE universe much like myself. It's made me proud to be a fan.
Okay, so getting kind of away from the pay-per-view itself for a second, let's talk about something of its origins. Joe, I want to ask you, you know, we've seen a lot, like you mentioned, like Erica mentioned, we had the 4 horsewomen of NXT. We've had Shayna Baszler through NXT, Kairi Sane through NXT, Asuka through NXT, Ember Moon through NXT, Nia Jax through NXT. You're talking about a lot of women who came up through this system to make their impact. Do you really think this is a WWE highlight of the women? Or do you think it's more of a, hey, we just remembered we had these women on the roster?
It depends. Like, back to what Michele was saying before, I think because of how well it was received and how, because if you heard the crowd in that arena last night, it was popping, man. It
was nuts.
Everything.
It was absolutely nuts.
So I think that showed especially the higher ups in the company that they can do these things and get a great reception. As for what you just asked, I think depending on what we see in the coming weeks of Raw and SmackDown, of whether or not they push more women's storylines as opposed to just having them thrown together in the middle of Raw when people are already getting tired of it, that will tell me whether or not they will keep on this thing of actually getting these great matches to happen on the main roster as opposed to in just NXT.
Okay. So, Michele, I want to ask you, going forward, going off of, you have a PR background, you talked about this being a PR stunt to you. What was there a point in last night where you sat there and thought, you know what, yeah, no, this is a real pay-per-view? Was there ever a moment where you're like,
oh my God, that Charlotte and Becky match. Oh, it gives me a happy brain aneurysm because that's what female wrestlers actually should be. They should be like beating the ever-living shit out of each other. Like, it was just so badass. Like, throwing chairs at each other, just pretty much, they were actually bloody. Like, that's when I realized, like, yeah, this is a real thing. Now, that Ronda and Nikki match kind of diminished all of it, but.
Yeah, we can talk about like the semantics of booking and strategy. Obviously, Ronda and Nikki were the 2 of the biggest names on the pay-per-view, and they do demand that highlighted spot, even though maybe the rivalry wasn't as strong as Charlotte and Becky's. My last question is for any of you, do you think the celebrity air of last night, being reality star versus UFC star, outweighed the performance of traditional professional wrestling, or that it was all about the wrestling at all times? It was never about the celebrity status.
Not even a little bit. Charlotte and Becky should have main evented.
Yeah.
They beat the hell out of each other. The crowd went nuts. I was grinning ear to ear.
Like you are right now.
Yes, because I love Becky Lynch.
The only reason, like you said, that it was Ronda and Nikki as the main event was because it was Ronda and Nikki. And I feel like sometimes too with pay-per-views, they usually tend to have hard-hitting matches, maybe in like the second to last match, like we saw with the Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair one. But I will say that that was one of the best women's matches I've ever seen, and probably one of the best matches of both of their careers.
Agreed.
I totally agree with that. Well, before Joe tries to put me in a disarmor and Michele gives me the rear view, we're going to wrap up this segment before I get beat up too much more. Thank you guys for joining me, but don't go anywhere because Red Dead Redemption 2 is up next. You're all dorks. You're all just dorks.